Welcome back. When I started the podcast and started getting guests, I looked through a list of people that I knew well and people that I thought would be interesting to the audience. And today's guest is definitely one of those, but this is also a very difficult intro and a challenging podcast to put out, because my guest today is Howard Wheeldon. Howard and I have known each other for a long time, good many years now, from the time when I was in the Air Force. He's got an amazing career. He was a chartered accountant and went through being a supply chain guy and then a consultant and a stockbroker and an analyst. And most recently, he's been a commentator and a broadcaster, and he'll talk a lot more about that in the interview. But when I approached him to do the interview some months back, he said, "Yeah, Bob, we can do that. That'll be great. Really like to do it, but we better get on with it, because not many people know this at this stage, but I don't think I've got very long left." And he had cancer. We recorded the interview on the 31st of August. And at the end of the interview, off air, I said to him, "Hey, look, just let me know if when you want me to put it out, because obviously I want to time that for you." And very, very sadly and completely unexpectedly, from I think a lot of points of view, he passed away on the 21st of September. And I've obviously approached his wife, Joanna, and asked her about what she would like to do with the recording. And she's very keen that it comes out. And it'll be coming out this coming Sunday. And that's the 19th of November. And his memorial service is on the 20th of November. So it seems very fitting that this will be coming out at a similar time. I'm just so sad for Joanna, particularly for Howard's two children, Ellie and Giles, that this is going to be effectively a posthumous podcast. But I hope it's also a great tribute to a man who had an amazingly full life, very, very analytical approach to what he did, a tremendous advocate for a great many different organizations. And he really did put out some fantastic things in recent years. He was renowned for his almost daily commentary piece on particularly defense sector issues, but also wider political issues. He was a regular broadcaster, very regular feature on programs like Radio 4's Today. And he will be much missed by everyone that knew him, I think. And I very much dedicate this podcast to Howard's memory, because he was a friend, and I will miss him, and I will miss his advice, his thoughts, his knowledge, frankly. My heartfelt sympathies to Joanna, to Ellie, Giles, and all his wider family, because this has got to be a very tough time for them. And I'm Bob Judson. This is Leading for Life Stories, and I hope you enjoy what should be a very good tribute to a great man. Well, Howard, welcome. It's an absolute delight to have you on my podcast. I've known you for a good number of years and always been fascinated by your views and everything you've got to say. I think it's a privilege to have you, and I'm delighted to have you as a guest.
I'm delighted to be with you. It's great to not only fun. It's nice to look back, and you don't get the opportunity very often.
No, absolutely. No, and I'm sure there'll be a bit of that as we go through today. That's for sure. Would you be kind enough, just to sort of as a start of a 10, you've had a fascinating and very, very diverse career. I'd be really interested, and I'm sure our listeners would be really interested, in a short summary of your kind of journey across the years, if you don't mind.
No, not at all. And I always say so far, because I haven't done yet. So there's hopefully a long time to go yet. I've had a great career. I've been one of those lucky ones who's changed career certainly on two occasions, arguably three, and that has made a big difference to what I brought to the table, because of what I've learnt in each compass that I've worked in. So I started off wanting to join the Royal Air Force. It had long been my desire, right from my teenage years, but arguably my parents wouldn't allow it. Now, in those days, this is the 60s, mid-60s, you obeyed your parents. Well, you might not have done, but I and a large number of people did, because that was the way things were. These days, I mean, the youth, rightly or wrongly, argue, and they will do what they want to do. And the bottom line is their way has to be the better way, because you can't. Freedom of choice is very, very important. And I've seen too many sons and daughters go into family businesses and have actually hated it. It was certainly the case with my father, into his father's family business. So I didn't want to do that. So I got on with what I hoped would be the Royal Air Force, but when it wasn't, I had to rethink. So, of all the things that I would have most unlikely done, chartered accountancy was the one that offered me the most. And so I spent 3 years in learning being articled and learning my trade. It was I can't say that I enjoyed it. I found it actually insatiably boring. But the bottom line of that period, where we're talking now from around about 66 to 68, the bottom line is that I learnt a lot. It gave me everything I needed to do throughout the careers that I have followed ever since. And even in defence, you have to understand figures. It's very, very important. You have to know how to read accounts. I spent years as an analyst in working for over 5 firms, I think, over a 28-year career doing just that. So it gave me a lot, and I'm very appreciative of it. But I never became a chartered accountant for the simple reason I never did final part 2. And that was because there was a call to go into a family business, which my mother had started back in 1962. Now, that was just a calculating bureau, punch card bureau, data preparation bureau, based in Birmingham. But it happened to have some very important clients. British Aircraft Corporation, then now BAE Systems, Rolls-Royce. We did a lot of work for Rolls-Royce in the 60s, right the way up to the time the company went bust in February 71, and many, and Nationwide Building Society also very, very, very important to us after Rolls-Royce had gone bust. We lost out considerably on Rolls-Royce going under, as did thousands of other businesses, and it was a big, big blow to us, and it was a big, big blow to their company. And the interesting thing, Bob, is that despite everything, never changed my opinion. My underlying opinion was one of always wanting to support Rolls-Royce. We'll come back to that, I'm sure, a little bit later on in my later career. But it is important, and it began the establishment of relationships for me. Relationships is how I work. I've always worked, and particularly so today. I've known some very, very interesting people in my time. I've had fun with it. I've never seen work as a chore. It's been my career. It's been my life. So leaving family apart. From the family business, I then created another business. This was after my mother died, and that business moved data and small parcels on a same day and overnight business. I started with a partner based in King Edward House in Birmingham, and it's very, very interesting. Now I look back, we built that business in a very short time at the worst possible part of the late 70s recession. It grew and grew and grew, and ultimately I sold out to DHL, a company I'm sure most will know of, affectionately known as Delivered Hours late in the trade. But that's very, very unfair. They're a great company. So that gave me, particularly after I sold out to DHL, that gave me my international career, because I stayed with DHL for 3 years. and I had USA, or sorry, North America, Europe, Far East, and Middle East as my area, my centres of excellence. The rest of the world was done by one other person. So also, I spent a lot of time in the Middle East. Gave me my Saudi element. So right from the start, I've always understood Saudi well because because I've been there many times. I understand and I respect them. I don't always agree with them, of course not. But I learned a lot, and I spent quite a lot that the RAF didn't teach me when I was very more closely engaged with them in later years, and which is very, very interesting, including that they fly Tornadoes a little bit differently to our guys in the UK. I've been fortunate to have done many backseaters. Then from there, I did a couple of consultancy jobs, one of which was Securicor in Brussels, and then changed career. I became a stockbroker. I qualified as a stockbroker. I could do that quite easily because I had I'd gone so far in terms of chartered accountancy, so it was a much quicker process than you might imagine. I chose to be an analyst rather than a front-facing broker, and I did that for the next 28 years, leading up to my becoming chief strategist of two US-owned but London-based operations here. That gave me. That was a brilliant part of my career, and I started doing a lot of broadcasting then as well, and right the way up to 2012, when I left the city, because I'd built up a huge contact base during that time, of which the military had jumped on the bandwagon. And if you're about to ask me the question why, I will answer that very, very simply and say, because my underlying belief has always been to stand up for industry, to support industry. I wasn't one of those analysts who went in and knocked them on their poor earnings in 1 year or two. I believe in long-term investment, and I've worked hard to fight on their half. I haven't succeeded, which is a shame. The city, I think, carries a lot of the blame for the situation we are in now, and why our competitiveness in terms of getting out there on the international stage is so limited, why our defence exports have been so limited, because we're just too risk averse.
Yeah, wow. When I said you got a diverse career, it's that really brings it home, doesn't it? That you've moved from studying chartered accountancy, having been an aspirant Royal Air Force candidate at the start, and we'll maybe come back to that in a minute.
Yes.
Then through to all those different things you've done with selling out to DHL, and then into stockbroking, and then subsequently, obviously, we'll definitely talk more about this. A very active broadcasting and sort of analyst career that's moved into commentating, which I think is where I really got to know you, and from your links, not least with the Air Force. You've been a really powerful advocate in that space, for not just for the Air Force but for defence as a whole, and I've really seen that over time. And when I say defence as a whole, I include in that all the industry side and everything that goes with it, because I think that is, as you say, it's really important, and it's great that you've been able to to be in that space.
One of the creations, thank you for that, and advocacy is the most important word you said there. Yes, I am an advocate of strong defence. I challenge government, support the military wherever I can. I don't always agree with them. We've had an incident over the last year which I violently disagreed with the policy and strategy of the Royal Air Force. So as a final comment on that question, one of the important things I've done is not to stand up for industry and the military, it's also to stand up for the people within them.
Yeah, and I totally recognise that in what I've read many times from your commentary, which is always so valuable. So no, thanks for that. When you look back now, then and go back to the beginning, where obviously you had that slightly strange start, and I'm sorry you didn't get into the Air Force, because obviously I did. I absolutely recognise what you said about following parental direction, really, and I think parental gateways is something I've talked about and with other people recently as well, which is a challenge. I mean, undoubtedly it's a challenge in terms of blocking people into paths they necessarily want to go to. And I think that still remains the case. When I was talking recently to General David Petraeus, it was about, during the hot war time of what we were doing on operations recently, I think it was quite difficult for parents quite a lot of the time where their children wanted to go into the military and things to say, we're really going to support that, because they viewed it as very, very dangerous. And, and obviously it was, no denying that, but clearly it's still a fascinating career.
And it will be, and it will always be that, despite the guts that we've witnessed over the past generation, and will no doubt continue to observe. There are still huge opportunities within the Royal Air Force, Royal Navy, and in certain aspects, and indeed the Army. But the Army's going to go through a separate process of sorting out its problems first. But there are opportunities there. We need them to succeed. We need to encourage our youngsters, and I hope that's what we will be doing more and more of. I think things like organisations such as RIAT provide great opportunities for that. The Royal Aeronautical Society does its bit as well. So we should be thankful for that. We mustn't lose what we've taken years to build up.
No, I totally agree. And I think actually, interestingly, the bigger challenge in many ways for all of the services is not maybe so much recruitment now, because I think there's still plenty of people knocking on the front door, but I think it's actually retaining them. When you've got the obvious challenges in the commercial world of money being paid that can't be matched in the public sector and never will be, and the offset that obviously has happened in the public sector, where a lot of the things that existed when I started my career in terms of layers of the onion, if you like, around command opportunities, promotion, overseas basing, sport, adventurous training, just to name but a few, those are much more difficult to come by. It's not that they've gone completely, but they're harder now, and the numbers have got smaller, the pressure's got greater, and the individuals have more responsibility and challenge, I think, than any of my peers did when I joined. And I think, therefore, keeping them is going to be harder for sure. And I know that's a current worry that's for the hierarchy. I just wanted to come back to you again, though, on the beginning of your career. You were very clear about what you did and why you did it, but just in terms of preparation and motivation for you this podcast all about leadership and getting yourself into a position where you were ultimately running a business that then got taken over. How did you prepare for that? Because you had such a diverse set of things you were doing. I'm just curious to know what you went through.
It's a lovely question, and the answer is not what you might have expected. Much of my career has been changed, altered, or happened by accident. So many years ago, in fact, it was in Birmingham when I was still in the family business. I went to what was then ICFC conference where the chairman was speaking, and they had various companies who ICFC, which loaned money out on a long-term basis, were helping their clients, small companies and medium-sized companies in the Midlands. And they had one example which I've never forgotten, and it was basically asked the question of a young man who started a business, built it up, how he got to where he has. And he separated each of several answers, because I can't remember them all now. But he separated them up by saying, "Then we had a bit of luck. Then we had a bit of luck." There's an element of that within my career, and there's absolutely nothing wrong with luck. It's a bit like common sense. It's gone out of fashion. We need more common sense and less inappropriate academic interference. We have, as I said earlier, we have to make ourselves less risk averse. and keep up with our competitors, and then hopefully we might be able to attack them. The other thing I would say, because it's linked to that, in case I forget, is that we manufacture about 10% of what we consume. I know there are elements with agriculture, for instance, where it's closer to 50%, but we have forgotten about research and development. We have forgotten about the ability to take risk, and government has forgotten about making things altogether. And I think that it remains a big worry. It's not changed much over the last 20 years. Perhaps it's got worse. But we do need to be aware of it, because we can't always remain a service-based economy. The UK just isn't like that. We need to get a better balance to what we manufacture, what we export, and what we buy from abroad.
No, it's fascinating on the manufacturing side, isn't it? I remember when I was leaving the Air Force, I went to Manchester Business School for a course. And one of the things we did was an industry visit, and we went to, of all things, a paint factory. I mean, it wasn't just a kind of wall paint. They were doing high-end technical paints for spacecraft and Formula One cars and things.
Yeah.
And they were very candid about the fact, and this is 8 years ago now, a bit more. They're very candid about the fact that they had outsourced to China a lot of the capability that they had, because they thought that was the sensible thing to do economically to make that work. But what they hadn't really bargained for, although they'd obviously, I think, gone into it slightly with their eyes open, but with a more of an optimistic lean, was that they would lose all their IP, and that effectively everything they got was reverse engineered. It was pretty shamelessly done. And it was technical, and that was a competitive advantage for them.
Yeah,
they were actually starting to bring things back to reshore stuff because they needed to do that in order to maintain their position. I think that's a microcosm view of a lot of other industries, where the rush for the kind of globalization, global village thing is now presenting some challenges. Yeah, Russia, Ukraine is a really obvious example.
Totally agree. So we need to rebalance. We need to stop promising and talking. We need to actually do something. That requires investment.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I totally agree with that. The specifically on leadership now, you've moved from being a business leader yourself, running a company, to, for many years now, analysing and commenting on business leaders and political leaders across a very broad range of sectors. And I'm just interested in what you've observed about the changes in leadership style of top-level leaders over the years, and your reflections on those changes.
Right. It's a very, very good and very interesting question. I will answer by saying it's about people, and it's about their approach and how they follow trends. Trends are important, and you can't stand still. You must move with all of them. But we went through a process. We did, and it's the same happened in politics. So David Cameron was a perfect example of that, in the sense he was a PR man by trade, and that showed all the way through his premiership. He didn't necessarily understand all the things that he should have done in terms of detail. So I think it's the way PR is damaged, because it's all encompassing. Has damaged the way we see things and do things. Now, it's a fashion. The world always goes back to itself, but we haven't got through that yet. And I think we need to change our approach and attitude and how we do things. And then I suppose it comes down to money. It's investment. Shareholders today are not interested, as I said earlier, in anything that doesn't produce earnings enhancement, and to produce it very quickly.
Fascinating. What about the individuals, though? I mean, when you look at top-level industry, you were talking about earlier on with across the defence sector, and also in government, individual capability, do you think it's different now to the way it was, or is the preparation different? What are they doing?
Here's the trend for you. The trend is to bring people in from outside when there may well be perfectly good people inside the company or group. We're talking here of very large companies. And overall, I think we are better in the way we choose people today. I think that's quite important. We have better people at the top of our companies, although we've had a number of examples of failure, of course. And what we don't have today, which is in a way a good thing, in my view, and that is family-controlled businesses where it's the acceptance and rule that the next generation take over. And I've recently read a book on Jay Lyons. Now you're probably too young to remember Jay Lyons coffee shops, and of course they tea and ice cream and all have you. It was a very, very large business which expanded, quite rapidly. And my point here also is overexpansion, because that's something that has changed. Let me come back to that in a second. We've changed the way we do things, and not necessarily for the best. But in terms of people, I think we are stronger today than we were 20 years ago and 30 years ago. There are exceptions. I wouldn't mind betting that somewhere in this line of questions, you're going to ask me who stands out most to you in terms of industry, and I will say actually it's Ralph Robbins, who in his 90s now, but he shaped Rolls-Royce, and he and John Rose, his CEO, because he moved on from CEO to chairman. He joined the company in 1955, and he stood down, I think, in about 2000 and from memory, about 2003 as chairman, and he knew that business inside out. He knew all the old hierarchy of it's now long since gone. He worked very well with his CEO, Sir John Rose, and people like that built fantastic businesses. And Rolls-Royce is a very, very good example of that, despite it being the one company that I single out that the city have always hated. They've loathed Rolls-Royce with a passion because it's long-term earnings. It's long-term research and development. You've got to design an engine and go through a long, long process to stay at the top. Rolls-Royce did that, but it cost them the vote of the investment community, and unfortunately, you can't do that. So we have to find better ways of financing a business.
Yeah, no, really, really interesting insights. And I totally recognize what you're saying about long-term versus short-term and chasing the quick profit, as it were.
Yeah.
And I think interestingly for the people, that's also true. If you look at when I do leadership training these days with some groups, then a very frequent topic of conversation for middle managers now is the sort of Generation Z world, where they are different. They're definitely different. Some, and particularly the ones that perhaps grew up through the pandemic and have joined the world of work during the pandemic and seen completely different things, where their expectations are sky high in terms of promotion and opportunity and desire. Their value set is very different, actually in a quite a good way in all sorts of areas, where they are very focused on the environmental credentials of organizations they're going to go and work for and things like that. But they're also very migratory. They're flitting between jobs very frequently. And I think the interesting challenge, which probably neither of us are going to have a long enough opportunity to see, is what this will look like in 30, 40 years' time when industry settles down with that kind of workforce. And clearly lots of other things are going to change over that time as well. But it's going to be interesting, isn't it, to see what difference that makes.
And give you an example here, because that's a very, very good point you make. When I started in stockbroking, I worked for a small company called Margate and Addenbrooke in Birmingham. Their only claim to fame was that they'd floated Lloyd's Bank in the 1880s. But in those days, I got to know around about 168 quoted engineering and capital goods companies. My element of specialism started as that. I had automotive in there as well as aerospace and defence, of course. But slowly over the years, it is whittled down. So it's very, very important to actually recognise how fast we've moved from one era into another. It's not good news. I don't approve it. And how long a company actually survives today. Yes, Rolls-Royce will still be with us in 50 years' time, and BAE Systems and Babcock and many other important companies in the defence and aerospace sector. And we do still build wings at Airbus. At Airbus Broughton, and we know it's very nice when I see an A380 go over here, to think that the wings and the engines, everything that makes the blessed thing fly, are built here in the UK.
Yeah, no, that's true. That is very true. And I think we've still got plenty of capability in all of those areas. I think the challenge that I was sort of alluding to is where the people, you talked about the value for Rolls-Royce, for example, of having a chap who'd risen up to ultimately be chairman of the company, who had been there for years, decades. Whereas that now is a real rarity, that people are just not staying in organisations for that length of time. Yeah. And I think in leadership terms, that is going to be interesting to see how much difference that makes.
Of course, we needed regulation. Of course, we needed to move with the times and what our international competitors were doing in governments. And I'm not against any of that. Where we do have a tendency in the UK to over-regulate after an event, and then live to regret it. We always seem to regulate more than anybody else. But there we are. But apart from that, it is very. All of the points you raise are very, very important.
You mentioned role models and talked about Sir Ralph Robbins. Who else has influenced you and impressed you across your career as an individual?
Well, I'm often seen as being very resentful of press and media, and I think for all the right reasons, because there's a tendency these days to make news create news rather than actually report it. But we'll leave that aside. But there are occasionally journalists who come up who make a big mark on your life, because they teach you such a lot in a very short period. Now, I'm leaving aside the political journalists here, but there was the good old days of the Foreign Office correspondent, and one such person is the late James Cameron. James Cameron is someone I hugely admired. I met him, and I got various of his papers here. I think I've also got every book he wrote, and he was the perfect ambassador for knowledge in terms of foreign nations, and he was an authority on India and US and various other states. He actually witnessed the Hiroshima bombing, as several journalists actually did, and he had a long career. Which stretched, starting in Dundee, actually, Dundee University, and which stretched right the way through to the time he died in 1986, from memory. He just taught me a lot, all through his writings. I met him a few times, and we got on extremely well. To which he gave me a number of his scripts and papers and what have you. And in my writing. The writing part of my career for commentary, I have, although it's very, very different, of course, I have taken on board his style and approach, for detail. This is a man who wrote and I was only thinking about this over the weekend, who wrote a piece for London Illustrated News following the death of King George VI in 1952. February 52, the late Queen's father. And he, now Cameron was not a royalist by any shape or form. Not easy for somebody to write a piece on the death of a king when in fact, the burial service at Windsor, when you're not a royalist, and to you this might just be an ordinary man, but but the people looked up to their king. He looked up to their king because the king understood his people, and he wrote a most fantastic piece, which I've put out on Commentary, I think, a couple of times now, because of what it said. Timing doesn't matter. I mean, it's important to recall great pieces of work.
Yeah, I think it's looking more broadly at that. I think one of the things that interests me about leaders these days is some are very good at putting ego aside and focusing on, it's not about them, it's about whatever they're doing. And I think that really shows with some individuals, both past and present, actually. And with others, obviously, just nakedly not that. You don't have to look very far across the Atlantic to see the difference.
No, what they do though, if they know in business, is the way they so often, particularly in the era of conglomerates. I mean, I'm sure you understand the old saying. It rarely comes up now, but conglomerate was just a collection of businesses, great companies like BTR and Hanson, and often fought over buying a company just to make themselves larger. They didn't have any understanding of the business, except the ability to strip out waste and make themselves more competitive. That's great, but often they took it too far. They became asset strippers, and I well remember another person who stands out as someone who, because he started off in Labour governments in the 60s, Sir Ronald Mackintosh. He later, after he left the civil service, became chairman of a company called APV, Aluminium Plant and Vessel, which made large equipment for the dairy industry, for butter making. It was Britain's Alfa Laval, and those in farming watching this, listening to this podcast, they will not know who Alfa Laval is, but never mind. Just imagine it as a bigger competitor of massive dairy equipment and food equipment. Now, they were bid for by a conglomerate by the name of CB Gorman. In fact, it had started life as a diving company, a diving equipment company, but by the 1970s, new CEO and chairman came in, and he started buying things here, there, and everywhere. And CB turned into a massive company, but it didn't last. Didn't last because they became too big for their own abilities. Every company has an optimum size, and that optimum size is different for every company. The late GEC, wrecked by somebody who wanted to turn it into a technology conglomerate, was wrecked, in the process. BTR, it bought some fantastic companies and it did some fantastic work, but when it bought Dunlop, the signs of stress became. But the takeover of Dunlop was one of the most interesting takeovers that I can ever recall. Again, back in the very early 70s, and then they took their hands to, as a nice link here to aerospace, they took their hands to buying Hawker Siddeley. And now the aerospace part of Hawker Siddeley had already been they'd all been, but through government policy, had merged into two companies, one of which Hawker Siddeley led. It was the rest of Hawker Siddeley, the bit that didn't make aerospace and military equipment, that I'm talking about here. And they bought this, and it was a mess. They owned Rolls-Royce Motors, not Rolls. They owned a range of company names that are been very, very important to us. But Hawker Siddeley almost killed off BTR, and in fact BTR changed its name and has shrunk ever since, and basically sold itself off. Tompkins, F.H. Tompkins was another company which I recall, and again it overbought. Its speed of growth was too high. It borrowed too much money, and this is the way we unfortunately lose many good businesses. And to give you an example of that, there was a company by the name of J. Seymour based in Erith in Kent, which I remember from a child because my father's engineering business actually made equipment for their stacker-by chairs. And it was a great business. It really was. It made really good profits. But the buyer of this company, he was the very first one to start the process of conglomerates, really, I suppose. He saw the opportunities in selling off the factory sites because you can build housing estates on them. And that's exactly what he did. So he killed off every company that he bought because, and we're talking about Jim Slater, every company he bought because there were opportunities in the balance sheet. Now we're seeing it again. We're seeing it here in the push on the retail sectors. It wasn't so long. I mean, I'm listening to the performance of Marks and Spencer's very recently, and interesting correlation because back in the 1990s, City pressurized them, as J. Sainsbury's was another one, because they'd always had their own asset, they owned their own business, premises rather than rent them. They pressurized the investment community, pressurized them to sell these off and then take them back as a lease them, and that sounds good. And then they return the money either to shareholders or they kept it and spread it amongst themselves. So the poor old company, Debenhams is another very good example of this. It's been bought and sold more times than I've had hot dinners, and now it's completely gone, of course. And we've killed off a lot of what we started. We're very, very good at undoing all the good that we put in. So it's just an interesting thing to me, and it's stuck in my mind how many great companies we have lost through corporate greed of a very, very small number of people.
Yeah, so you kind of almost took me to where I wanted to go next on your corporate greed point. Do you think how much of that is individuals versus actual corporations and executives or groups of executives and or boards? Well, and how much could they shape that differently? And the reason I say that is because I think that's very, very relevant today when you look at the people that are impacted by that. My sense of the world of business, having stepped out of the Air Force only 8 years ago into the private sector, is there is a lot more understanding and focus on the individuals that are working in those organizations, even though it's still not perfect. I mean, I've been through and seen on the client side as well a couple of mergers which have been pretty unattractive in terms of what's happened to people involved in the company.
Yeah.
But is that all about the corporate balance sheet, or is there enough thought going in from a leadership point of view about the people
both.
that work for it?
It's about both. You have to please the shareholder, because if the shareholder is not loses interest, then you might as well throw in the towel. Yes, it is about people. It's about the people that they actually help to put in. I remember Tube Investments, a very good example here, which was for a company sort of Birmingham London based, and a big, very important company in making tube and other things. And some of its businesses fortunately still survive. And they were hell bent on acquisitions. So in the space of 3 years, Lewington, who was the CEO, had actually sold off every business that TI owned when he came in, because they weren't doing the sort of profits that he wanted to do. Lucas was was, in the space of a very short time, seriously damaged by its CEO having been too sleepy, admittedly. Then a new CEO comes in and basically sells the company short, sells shareholders short. That was the same person that then went on immediately from Lucas to GEC, tried to change everything, and wrecked it in the process. GEC no longer exists. Fortunately, the crown jewels of GEC, Marconi Electronics, went into BAE Systems.
Yeah, and that accountability thing that you're sort of alluding to there is an interesting point, isn't it? Because I think that comes up time and time again on very current issues. I mean, it seems very quick for the media often to do this. That immediately they're focused on the chief exec and their bonus versus actually the what's gone on. But equally, people do sometimes move from one job to another, having by demonstrably not done a great job. Yeah. And actually, there is very little accountability. I saw that back in the military time as well, where obviously people move around quite quickly, and some of the time decisions that they've made come home to roost years later. That's a real challenge, isn't it? How much of that have you seen yourself, and what do you think the solutions are? I've
seen a lot of it. I've watched all of them really, and it leads me on, if I may, just to bring up. You mentioned press. Broadcasters are equally as bad. I think we've allowed ourselves to be kidded, and the public, who listen to radio and they love radio and television, they've been kidded into a belief of what business is. If you look at the BBC website, for example, on the business website, there's very little business there. There's lots of consumerism, consumer related, but there's very little business, and that's always what worried me. Now, BBC does a very, very good job normally, but now you listen to the business slot on the Today program, for instance, and I will guarantee you that only 1/3 is generally business. The rest is actually consumer related, which shouldn't even be on a business program. So it's turned full circle. So the public understanding, this is the ordinary, but this is the general public, who are often shareholders. Their pensions rely on what these companies are doing, and they're not getting a proper message about what business is all about. They only see the worst of it or none of it at all.
Yeah, interesting, isn't it? Very interesting. Because I do think there's a values system piece in this that, at an individual level, again, people growing up as leaders. Because one of the reasons I got into leadership development was because I don't really think it's something that is done particularly well in a lot of corporates. That's not a universal truth, of course. Some are very good at it. But there are lots that aren't. And I think developing not only the business skills, but actually the people skills and the communication skills and everything that goes with that as a leader to make the right decisions and carry those through and therefore deliver the right outcome. It's obviously challenged by pressure from other forces, not least shareholders and the like you've already touched on. But I think that is a really difficult thing for your average modern day leader now to get their head round. Which I don't know if there's an easy solution to it, but it's certainly something that has got worse, I think, as the level of scrutiny, the instantaneous nature of social media, which can be so damaging to people, the sort of vitriolic criticism that lands very, very quickly. I mean, you only have to look this week at what happened with National Air Traffic Services. And now I know both the chief exec and the ops director of National Air Traffic Services very well. And I was listening to Martin Rolfe yesterday on the Today program on this. And I think he did a really great job of explaining what actually had gone on in a very clear clinical way. And it wasn't helpful, some of the language coming back at him from Nick Robinson actually on that occasion, where he was just trying to push buttons that the public want to be pushed, but it's not going to help the solution. It's not going to turn around and explain it better to people. And there is this kind of quick response, quick instantaneous feedback thing that people are seeming to be demanding these days, which I think is very difficult for a leader.
It's funny you should mention Nats, because I recall the last time this happened, the last big one that happened when Nats had a major technical problem. And it was on a Friday. Now, the former CEO, former Martin Ross' predecessor, had spoken at the Royal Aeronautical Society in London. Because remember, you have to remember, Nats are on the south coast pretty well, and so he'd come up, and to speak to the Royal Aeronautical Society at an event, and which was excellent. And he stayed overnight in London, and perfectly obviously, and he took Friday off as a holiday with his wife. They couldn't get hold of him when, for whatever reason, when all this happened, and media were really having a go at, where's the CEO? What, they're entitled to have a day off, and sometimes people can't be, as we all know. If you're in the coast or whatever, they can't get hold of them. He came back as soon as he possibly could, but that wasn't until the Friday evening. So. And my goodness, he did survive, and I think he deserved to survive because he did. There was a strategy in place, and they put it into effect, and it did work. The reasons, the deeper reasons behind it, were probably left much to be desired.
Yeah, again, fascinating area of discussion, because one of the things I talk about quite a lot is delegation and the ability and importance of learning to delegate if you're a leader. And for two reasons. One is because you need, as you just said, you need time off as the leader. You can't be in a position where you're constantly at the coalface. But equally, you need to develop the people that work for you so they get better and they feel more trusted, they feel more empowered, and they are more capable.
Yeah.
And there's a classic risk at the moment where you've got to have the senior man. I mean, politicians, I think, are particularly unfortunate with this, where when something happens, they're not instantaneously available. It doesn't matter how well it's being handled by their other ministers or their officials or whatever. They're still going to be called, castigated for being somewhere where, somewhere different. And I think that often, some of the time, okay, it is obviously stupid. I mean, there's no question that there are occasions when they've made bad errors of judgment. But there are equally sometimes where you think, well, hang on a minute, you can't instantaneously get back from somewhere. And, you can actually be out of communication, genuinely out of communication, even in today's very connected world. So I think it's a particularly difficult area if you're in a leadership role now as to how you manage that. I just want to take you to things about you and what, your highs, lows, etc. Looking back across the whole of your career so far, what do you wish you'd done differently and why?
That again is a very interesting question. And I didn't go to university. I went to what we affectionately called, I think it was it John Major? I can't remember, the University of Life. And I've never regretted it, but I've been quite bitter the way, if you didn't have a university education, you are frowned upon. And now it's interesting, that seems to be changing, because there's a lot of things that other people who chose not to, or whatever, for whatever reason, didn't go to university. Do I regret not going? I suspect the answer to that is yes, but you have to remember that in the mid 1960s, less than 10% of students went on to university. There weren't so many of them. Of course, they've been hyped up into universities. A lot of them have over the years, and it never stopped my being very well recognised and I think appreciated. And I was on the board of Birmingham University Business School for a number of years. So I did get into university slightly in another way, if you know what I mean. So that is one regret. we've already talked about the RAF. Well, that's history. And I just would like to. I regret that it's not so much me; it's that we have not achieved as much as we have done. I fought and advocated for industry and defence exports and and aerospace over many years. It's the same old arguments I'm fighting today. I fought against defence cuts. For how many decades? The situation hasn't changed. It's just got worse. The failure to sell defence to the public. If the public aren't on side, you can't go anywhere. And we fail to do that. I recall giving a lecture at Birmingham University about 10 years ago, and when I enjoy speaking. I'm sorry, my voice is a bit hoarse today, but I enjoy speaking. And but what does one do these things for? You do it to put your views across, and you do it because not for the spoken element. It's actually the Q&A. Q&A is very, very important because it shows what's on your mind. And I recall giving this lecture, and this same very intelligent young man, like 23, and he was a third-year student, and he kept on asking me a range of questions. Now, this lecture I was giving was not related to defence; it was actually related to Brexit. The membership of the EU, and I suddenly thought he's got his views are very interesting, and they nicely challenged me in terms of the Q&A aspect. And I thought I'm going to bowl a bouncer here, and I said to him, "Tell me, man." I can't remember his name now, so I'll say that. What is your understanding of what NATO is? Pause and think about that for a minute. And the answer that came back stuck in my mind ever since, because he said, it is an institution of the EU. And I couldn't believe this. I could not believe that an intelligent person, such as he was, undoubtedly, could actually answer. His lack of understanding was just amazing. I've always remembered that. There are a few cliches one remembers, and as a youngster, when engines were at the front of the bus and entrances at the back, I lived in the Midlands and I used Midland Red buses a lot. And above the head of the driver was this sign which said, "If in doubt, don't." And I've always remembered that, because it's I'm not against taking risk in certain elements, but there are many occasions, and driving is one of them. Surely with a 10-ton Leyland PT2 Titan bus, that is very, very relevant. You remember these things, and they stand out in your mind. So regrets, I've probably got many. In looking back, I think it would have been my career would have been very different had I gone to university. But I've enjoyed every single solitary moment of it. Well, except for one point, which we might get onto in a minute, that I do not like to see. It's been fascinating and very rewarding. I suppose also rewarding bit is the number of fantastic people I've met over the years. There was one very interesting gentleman who stands out, I should have mentioned earlier, and his name was Sir Arnold Hall, and he was CEO of Hawker Siddeley. And he, at this event I was attending, although I wasn't speaking, I don't think. Yes, I was. I opened the event, it was this is absolutely fascinating. There's a number of younger people in the company presenting to an audience which had given them. They wanted solutions to a specific problem. I will never forget Arnold Hall saying when this poor young chap had presented a view, and he looked up at him and he looked him in the face, and he said, "What possible problem could I have that this is the right solution?" And it was fascinating. It was a bit of a put down, but which you should say a CEO shouldn't do. CEO should be there to motivate and incentivize his people all the time. But there we are. That young man will never have forgotten that.
No, you're right. So those kind of moments, I think, particularly from a leader, you do have to be really careful as well with that sort of stuff. And I think even more so these days, where everyone seems to walk on eggshells constantly. It's more of a challenge.
We're probably all a bit guilty of that.
The university thing's fascinating because I didn't go to university either, as you know, and I went straight into the Air Force at 18, and obviously more of my generation were going to university, but still a lot weren't. And I don't regret it at all. I mean, I was on the front line literally still as a 21-year-old. I made it to a squadron in Germany a couple of months before my 22nd birthday. And as I've said in other pieces I've done recently, and I was on nuclear quick reaction alert at the back end of the Cold War with an atom bomb on the bottom of the aeroplane at the age of 21, which was amazing. I mean, and had I gone to university, it wouldn't have been like that at all. And I think there have been opportunities through life to kind of develop professionally, academically, and particularly in the military, which is very good at that. That's helped a lot with that. But I think it is something that potentially people do get too hung up about. I recognize these days it's seen as even more important. But having just finished 8 years as a school governor at a big independent school, I was very, very quick to point out a lot of the time that, look, life skills are just as important as academic qualifications here. Academic qualifications are important, but nobody, and I do mean nobody, has ever asked me what grades I got in my A-levels and my O-levels in the day. And people obsess about this sort of stuff these days. I think it's important that they have the right level of hurdles to jump over and hoops to jump through to kind of prove themselves, but not necessarily get to a point where it's a be all and end all, because it isn't.
I agree with you entirely.
What about high point? What's your greatest, or in your view, your most important achievement, and what legacy do you want to really leave? Accepting that might be some way off yet, but what do you want that to be?
High point's a very difficult a difficult question to answer. I mean, there've been so many. It's the people I've known and the way. Perhaps I'm good at it. But it's just people I've known and the large amounts I've learned from them, and the relationships I've built. Those are my high points. People are very, very important. I gave the Cecil lecture 2014. I think it was 2014. Yeah, that was probably, I would regard, as one of the best speeches I've ever given. And there were a large number of RAF, and in fact, military people there, and I'm able to speak and say what they can't, and it's the audience that day was quite amazing, because you could tell. I'm not saying they didn't applaud, because they did, but I think that applause had been twice as loud had they not had the restrictions placed on them, but those are proud moments for me. I was only thinking last week, and I was given an award by the Air League for a lifetime of advocacy, of air power advocacy, and the prize was the award was made by Prince Philip, the late Duke of Edinburgh, so there were 4 prizes. One was to Tim Peake, our astronaut, who was up in the air at the time, but he spoke to us on the phone down. It was just amazing to think that could have been impossible. And then the then chief of the Air Staff, Sir Andy Bulford, presented a prize. Took a prize on behalf of the Air Training Corps, which I'd been an air cadet, so that was great. So 3 prizes, not 3, 4, and then me. And now, unfortunately, I'm Foreign Office trained. I spent best part of I suppose 3 months, at the Foreign Office, and I learnt a lot on how you do things and diplomacy, and it's allowed me to do quite a lot in defence exports and assisting what was then Defence Export Services Organisation, all of which I just love because that's the only way you can do it. All my work in relation to and supporting the military can only be done for love. So that's fine. I'm very proud of that. Anyway, one of the things that you are trained at, if you do meet royalty, is and they ask you difficult questions, how do you cope? And I remember this. It all came shooting back to me when the Duke came up to me, and presented me the prize, the award. It was a certificate, and he said, "I've only got one question for you. How do you make any money out of it?" And I'd been given a great spiel, and it was a very, very difficult question. You had to think on your feet very, very quickly. It would be no use me saying, I'm fine, I'm well looked after, or trying to avoid a proper answer. I knew that, which is why I came straight out with industry, and industry has been my sponsors over the years, and my continual support for them, and long may that continue.
Yeah, it's great. Prince Philip was the master of tricky questions.
Oh, he was.
I was fortunate enough to meet him on a number of occasions.
Yes.
Yeah, your Tim Peake thing amuses me as well, because Tim and I share a godson. We're both godfathers to a mutual friend's oldest son, and while he was on the space station, he rang up our godson from the space station, so that kind of eclipsed anything that the other godparents could do. Yes. Really.
Yeah. Well, we were actually standing talking to his parents and his sister, I think, at St James's Palace when silence was called for and these prizes were given. I'm not sure they even knew that he was going to be, because technology might have failed. It would be difficult to lead anybody on when something didn't happen in the end, but it did, and brilliantly it did too. So
yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing. He awarded a Brit Award as well, didn't he, from space? I mean, that's pretty.
Did he really?
Must be a first. I don't think that's extraordinary, really. The counter argument, of course, counterpoint around highs is also lows. So, what's your low point, Howard? What's the most challenging time you've had, and how did you deal with it?
The most challenging time I had was actually last year, when I knew of all this. I'd been sitting on it, although the story was broken by Sky News' Deborah Haynes. As soon as she had done that, I could actually come clean on a lot of knowledge I had about RAF training, diversity and inclusion. I let it all come out, and I think I was absolutely right to do so. I had over 900 responses to my commentary on that day, which is a record by far from a 9,500 list, and it was quite amazing. It was a low point because I'd seen the RAF reach a low point. I'd seen so many people leave. This didn't just affect those who were blocked down the bottom end because of this illegal movement of certain members of ethnic minorities, and because the diversity argument, it wasn't just just about that. It was that we could be so foolish as to ignore that merit has to be the number one facet of any movement in a business. You cannot and should not promote people who are not ready for that promotion. And it all came out, and I couldn't believe the number of emails I had. It was quite unbelievable, serving and non-serving, and lots of retires as well. Only 2 of that 900 plus were in disagreement.
Wow.
One of them sent me a foul email. Someone who's fancied himself as being a future Kaz, so you need to say he's not on my list. I won't stand language like that. And another one who had retired, and well, everybody's entitled to their views, and I'm not saying I'm always right, because I certainly am not. But that was my low point. My high point, because I was so shocked at the response, and of course how it dragged on, for 6 months and has never been properly concluded. I think the former chief has a lot to answer to, but he wasn't made accountable, and I think that is disgraceful. And I'm not someone who criticises senior members of the RAF. I certainly wouldn't do it, unless I had very good reason to do it. But it was a low point because I hated doing it. But I'm glad I did it, because it was I was standing up for RAF people, and I'd do that again.
Yeah, very tricky time. It's very, very hard to navigate some of those things and take those kind of difficult decisions. I totally recognise that. That kind of, maybe it's a reasonable segue in here. You watch and you've met an awful lot of senior leaders in all sorts of different walks of life, and you've equally been around a long time yourself, doing lots of quite demanding things. What are your top tips, as it were, for work-life balance and stress relief, relaxation, and how good do you think people are at that these days?
Well, if you look at me and work-life balance, I'm very bad at it, extremely bad. I love my work, and I make sure I have one day off at weekend. I don't even come into my office here. But I think never ever, however difficult it is, never forget sense of humour. It's so important in what you do. I mean, what can make or break my day in the morning? And I'm not promoting the newspaper here, but it's Matt of the Telegraph, a good Matt cartoon, and he is brilliant, absolutely brilliant. Can set me up really well for the day. I love humour. I love humour like that. I don't like jokes, or that doesn't do anything to me. And comedy doesn't exist on television or radio today. The last thing I thoroughly enjoyed was probably Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy on radio. So being able to laugh at yourself, accepting that you don't always get it right. And yours is only a view. It does carry weight, but it is only a view at the end of the day. And I've had a wonderful family. I married late in life, and married till I was 40. So the 2 children are, afterwards, and they are grown up. So, but I guess it just about right. I don't play sport. I used to play real tennis. Rackets, but that's a long time ago now. So I think I get it just about right. I don't necessarily know when to stop, but I have cut back a bit because my age, it's probably the right thing to do.
Yeah, and it's interesting. Again, it's another interesting area, isn't it? Because I think a lot of people have a kind of work balance. Really, is they do a bit less work on a couple of days of the weekend, and that is definitely a trait that I still see quite a lot of, and has not been helped by the age of email and mobile phones and so on, where you can be constantly connected.
You're absolutely right, and I would add to that the telephone. Once upon a time, we used to have these strange things with a dial, and you pick the receiver up and you rang this number, and somebody answered at the other end. It was wonderful. Now, can you get people to telephone rather than the text? Or now, what's the most brilliant development for me throughout my career? It's got to be the internet and emails. It's absolutely superb. We are so lucky, and Google and things like Google, which are again very interesting. It reminds me of my when I was in I don't have any political associations today because of what I do. I have to be independent, but I always vote. But nobody else knows what that is. But it does remind me of several occasions in the long and distant past of my time that I was a young conservative back in the 1960s, and I happened to win a public speaking competition. And it was a young conservative, but it was their main conference, it was very difficult. The prize was dinner with Ian MacLeod, former Chancellor of the Exchequer in Edward Heath's government, and I'd hardly ever been to London before, let alone into the Savoy for dinner, so it was. I done my research, whatever I could, and I said to him, he wasn't an easy man to talk to, and I said, sir, because we called everybody sir in those days, you've never written a book. I most certainly have. Now, he was a senior Conservative politician, and would you like to know what it's called? Yes, there was me dithering and my teeth clattering. He said, it's called Bridge is an Easy Game. And what's more, it's the Bible of bridge. so really put me in my place, and but it was a laugh about it. I'm actually a survivor of Enoch Powell's Rivers of Blood speech. I actually went to the speech live in Birmingham in it's in April '68. That had a profound what's the word I'm looking for? It marked my life, and in some ways, I don't think it was all bad, because I think it's what led from it is what we see today, which is much better race relations than we had back in the '60s. So good did come out of it. It wasn't all bad. And as I implied before, I suppose fun is just so important, and I do enjoy the fun that I have with those around me, and I continually. You never stop learning, never ever stop learning in this game, because it's fast changing.
No, I completely agree with that. That's for sure. Getting towards the end, Tad, but I can't let you go without some more discussion really about the thing that you've spent most of your recent times on. You've been very forthright in your views about cuts in UK defence capability. And obviously the world is facing more challenges than at any time in recent memory. I mean, certainly since the end of the Cold War, arguably since the end of the Second World War. And I'd be really interested in your thoughts, not so much on the specifics around UK defence on this, but the potential impact on the UK's relationships with key allies, given the continuing pressure that we're under around defence spending and defence capability.
I recall back in 2010 when Liam Fox was Secretary of State for Defence. And he and I had very good relationship. And SDSR 2010 went down like a hole in the head, as you will well remember yourself. And out of it, our American allies were hugely concerned. So Liam was summoned, I think, to explain the cuts to his American counterpart. And he, when he came back, he said, "It's fine. It's he understands. He's supportive." He phoned me the following day. I don't know. I mean, I didn't have that close a relationship with him, but he actually phoned me live on a Sunday morning, and actually said how appalled he still was at what we were doing. So, and we continued to kick the Americans in the teeth in terms of capability. We say we're going to buy this number of jets, and we always cut the numbers. E7 is another example of that. Going to buy 3, crucial to replace the Sentry capability that we've chucked out. Mainly because we've had to chuck it out because we'd failed to invest in it. We completely forget that defence should be the number one priority of any government, and the French do it, the Americans do it, the Dutch do it, the Danish do it, and I mean, it is very, very sad to watch the attitudes of our NATO allies to what we're doing. Just an aside to bring in the humour point here, because I wouldn't like to leave you with anything that wasn't humorous. I've always been, except this year, been to the RAF conference, or the what used to be called the Chief of the Air Staff's Air Power Conference, and I remember one year, quite a few years ago now, the head of the Danish Air Force giving a very interesting speech. The American chief was there, the French chief was there, and then was little old Denmark. Subject was about what they were sending out to Afghanistan, and may well have been Iraq as well. I can't actually remember. He said, we looked at this, we decided we've got X number of these and X number of the of F-16s and X number of those and so on and so forth, and helicopters. We decided we'd send everything out. We didn't need it here at home. We weren't being specifically challenged in Denmark, so we sent the lot out. What a fantastic attitude and approach that was. Now, I'm not saying it's relevant to all of us. We've spent lots of money on the Navy, and they needed it. They still need it, and the Army has only got itself to blame for the mess it's in, but it will sort itself out in due course. I don't think the announcement of the new Secretary of State for Defence today will help the Army in any way, and it's not what many would have wanted. But there we are. We have to live with it for 15 months and see where we go. I've forgotten what the question was now.
You kind of answered it about attitude of allies and so on. So no, that's fine. That's
and the
really
French
helpful.
will steal the thunder that we give up. How is it they're able to do it and we can't? Simple answer to that question is because we spend so much on health, we spend so much on welfare, we overcook it, and we don't actually. And you'll shoot me down in flames saying we probably don't pay enough in tax. Well, too few people pay the tax that they should be paying. We've never sorted that out. We need to sort that out. We need to spend more on defence. And I'm not suggesting that government spending on welfare and NHS and education, should be changed. Absolutely not. But we do need to get our priorities right. And if those priorities say we've got to spend a lot more on defence, then we've got to raise that money, and we raise it through taxes, not through falsehoods.
Yeah, and so we could have a whole podcast on its own, I think, on all the politics around the different spending levels in different departments, because for sure it's a real challenge. I mean, amusingly, I was you talk about the Danish chief. I was at the Royal International Air to, I think it was pretty much my last year in the Air Force, actually, when I was still Director on Warfare, so it was probably 2014. And I was sat next to, at lunch, I was sat next to the Danish chief's wife.
Right.
And and talk about the fact that when I was a young pilot at Bruggen on the Jaguar, we'd gone out to from Germany, gone up from Bruggen to the air show at Aalborg. And Aalborg's kind of legendary in Denmark as an airbase. And and I said, it's the best party I've ever been to. And it was a pretty wild party. And she said, what year was that? And I said, it was 1985. And she said, I was there. I'm going, all right. Because it was a pretty interesting time. It was very.
You raise another very interesting point there, because I think it's high time we moved away from a promotion system that was based on Cessa's years, and I think we really do need to think of better ways of finding the merits that we actually need to find, and the leaders. I think the leadership of the RAF has been disappointing in recent years. There have been some excursions to that, and I'm not going to name any names, but I do think with our process of promotion, and indeed how long they are in post, it needs to be reconsidered.
Yeah. No, I think it's a perennial problem, isn't it? How long do you leave people in post? We talked about the accountability point earlier on, the sort of level of meritocracy and the age and challenges that brings. And I think it is difficult in the military because obviously you can't anything like as easily laterally hire people in the way that you would do in the private sector, because you need certain skill sets and things and experience that to give you any kind of credibility. I mean, it is fascinating. Rich Knighton is a very good friend of mine, and I think having taken over as chief in the summer, as the first non-aircrew chief of ever.
It's a very good decision, and I think he's got to stabilise first, because there's a lot of work to do to bring the people with you. They're still leaving in their droves, and we need to stop the hemorrhage.
I think, it's interesting though, isn't it? Because I agree with you completely. I mean, he's obviously got to settle a lot of stuff down, and not least some of the challenges that have gone on in recent years. But what I've been really pleased to see is there was a bit of a discussion, and the media was trying to whip this up a little bit about the first non-pilot chief of air staff, and it's going to be cause all sorts of controversy. And I've seen almost none of that. I've seen very little critique or anything other than positive comment, and that speaks volumes. A, for Rich, because he is a great guy, but also actually for people just generally having a pretty sensible head on where they need to be with this. And that's good.
I chose, funny enough, in terms of not to say anything, not to do a commentary on it, for the simple reason I thought by not saying anything about his not being a pilot, not being not having wings in that sense. It means it doesn't matter to me. It didn't.
Absolutely.
I didn't want to make anything of it.
No, I mean, he's the right. If you're going to put a guy in at this stage with that kind of set of additional pressure, he's the right man for that job for sure. He's a really, really good guy. Yeah. Howard, very last question. What's the most difficult question you've ever been asked?
I knew you were going to ask me that. What's the most difficult question I've ever? It might well be the Duke of Edinburgh, because my goodness, do you have to think when you're on a podium? Do you have to think quickly in terms of the answer? But in all honesty, it's people want to jump in there. What is it? What's this? Age. Age seems to be very important to a lot of people. Wrong people, I might add, and I often get asked, "Well, are you going to retire?" And I said, "No. Why would I retire? I love what I'm doing. I'm still adding value. I will continue to do that. There are those who would wish I'm 6 foot under and not saying some of the things that I do. Well, I'm sorry. That's You got me around for a bit longer yet.
That's brilliant. Howard, you've been very generous with your time. I'm really, really grateful to you. You've got a huge amount of experience over a very long period of time now, and lots of stuff in there that is tremendously interesting, not least around all of the kind of nature of British industry and the things, the way it's changed shape and the way that people involved with it have influenced that change, not always for the good. Yeah. So no, it's fantastic. Thank you very much indeed.
It's a pity there's no money in books, because there's lots of companies, lots of CEOs who I'd love to see their accounts, Ralph Robbins being one of them. But that's where we
brilliant.
are.
Thank you, Howard. I really appreciate your time.
Thank you very much. Thanks.